Good evening and blessed be, everyone. Welcome to Readings at the Witching Hour. I'm your host, Aries StarWind, and I want to welcome everyone to the very first installment of Readings at the Witching Hour here on Witches Connected. So, the first book we're actually going to get started on is Wiccan Beliefs and Practices by author Gary Cantrell. This book includes rituals for solitaries and covens. But we're gonna go through. I like this book because it actually it starts from the beginning. It lets you understand exactly what Wicca is before you start delving into what a lot of people like to do. And a lot of people are interested in Wicca in the beginning because they're interested in spell work. And, doing spells is a very big part of Wicca, but there's a lot more to that, and you should know the history of it and exactly why you should be doing spells and why you shouldn't. So, this book is this is Wiccan Beliefs and Practices by author Gary Cantrell, and I actually started reading this, and I felt the need to share this with everyone and read it along with you guys because it's a very good book and it's very informative and I think it'd be a good read for us to listen to, chill out and have a good time and enjoy each other's company. And it's October, so it's time for us to come together and do some things together and enjoy a good read. So I'm gonna get started here. We're gonna start with definitions. We're gonna he does have an introductory kind of section here, but that's basically why he chose to write this book. But we're gonna go ahead and get started in the first chapter of definitions, and the first part we'll go through each part for each session that we have. The first part we have here is Wicca and paganism. So we'll go ahead and get started here. What does the word Wicca really mean, and where did it come from? Wicca is only one of many religions of the world that can be grouped under the umbrella term paganism. So before we can define Wicca, we must first define the word pagan. Pagan comes from the Latin word pagani or paganus, which translates into hearth or home dweller, generally meaning a country person. In the days of the Roman Republic, the word pagani was somewhat derogatory in its application, since those so addressed were considered country cousins and were usually thought of as being somewhat inferior to more worldly, city-dwelling counterparts. With the expansion of Christianity, the word pagan was redefined as one who worshipped the old gods and goddesses and did not seriously worship the new Christian God. In the early years of the Christian movement, being a pagan had not yet taken on the ominous overtones of heathen or heretic that later led to the persecution and horrors of the Dark Ages, that period in history generally referred to as the Inquisition or the Burning Times. The current definition of the word pagan from the American Heritage Dictionary of the English language is a practitioner of any of the non-Christian, non-Muslim, or non-Jewish religions, typically holding a polytheistic or pantheistic doctrine, philosophy, or creed. A pagan is thus anyone who follows religion other than Christian, Muslim, or Jewish religions. This obviously includes such diverse religions as the Hindu, the Taoist, Confucianism, Buddhist, Pacific Islander, American Indian, and of course all the nature-oriented or earth-worshipping god and goddess religions. According to the information called from both the 1993 Encyclopedia Britannica and the 1998 Cambridge Fact Finder, the total of these so-defined pagan religions accounts for approximately 50% of all the religious adherents in the world, which is needless to say a significant number of individuals. Now it actually has a figure here. Let's see what we have. It says figure 1 gives a general graphic representation of how paganism, the traditions of Wicca, and some of the various paths within Wicca can be visualized from the standpoint of our own perspective and learning. And this is actually the author's kind of perspective on it. And he has a table here, and it starts at the top with the word paganism. And under paganism lies Buddhist, Confucian, Egyptian, Olympian, Wiccan, and all others. But then he has a kind of subgroup here under Wiccan, which I find interesting. And in the subgroup, he has British traditional Wicca, Celtic Wicca, Dianic Wicca, eclectic Wicca, Gardnerian Wicca, and others. And then he has sub-traditions of this, which derive from the Celtic version of Wicca, and under that he has Anglo, eclectic, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and then all others under that one as well. So we'll go ahead and continue. Through magic, in order to bring about change, is practicing witchcraft, and therefore a person who does this is a witch. Given that definition of witchcraft, one could assume the title of witch if magic were practiced by invoking a deity associated with virtually any theology, and no one could tell you that you were not practicing witchcraft as you understood it. There are also those within Wicca who may not totally recognize your claim to be a witchcraft practitioner, since that claim may fall outside of what their tradition or path may define or recognize as the practice of witchcraft. This may sound like splitting hairs, but I think it has some validity, and that the title of witch and the understanding of what witchcraft is can be related directly to how one interprets the origin of those words. That is not to say that a person initiated as a witch under a theology outside of Wicca has no validity as a witch. Far from it. I'm only saying that the validity of one's claim to be a witchcraft practitioner may not necessarily be recognized by all those who practice under other traditions or paths of Wicca. This analysis, however, is probably more... I like this. I had to go back on that. But this analysis, however, is probably more germane and firmly anchored to the teachings associated with the previously mentioned British traditionals, such as the Gardnerian and Alexandrian traditions, and much less so in the newer and generally more eclectic craft traditions that have evolved outside of the influence. Many people feel that technically the word witch should be applied only to those practitioners of paganism who follow one of the many traditions of the Wiccan religion. The reason for this seems to be rooted in the derivation of the word witch. Some dictionaries and encyclopedias vary when defining its root source, with some listing it as a word of Germanic origin and others claiming it to be Old English. The 1999 World Book Encyclopedia defines Wicca as the practice of witchcraft, wherein most witches call their religion Wicca, from the Anglo-Saxon word meaning wisdom or wise, which is the root of such word as witch and wizard. The American Heritage Dictionary of the English language defines the word witch as from the Middle English wiki. I had to pronounce that correctly. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, sorry. Middle Eastern Wicca. Oh no, that's it. From Old English wiki, feminine, and Wicca, masculine, meaning wizard or sorcerer, a believer or follower of Wicca, a Wiccan. The 1999 World Book Encyclopedia defines the word witch as being from the Old English word Wicca, which is derived from the Germanic root wick, meaning to bend or to turn. By using magic, a witch is believed to have the ability to change or bend events. The word can be applied to a man or a woman. The word witch thus seems to be able to claim a derivation from Wicca, meaning a practitioner of the Wiccan religion, a wise one, or one who can influence and change events. The word witch and Wiccan would thus appear to be interrelated, at least according to those referenced sources. Does this mean that only Wiccans are witches? Not necessarily, since we have already said that in a broad sense, a witch is one who has the ability to influence events through magic, and that his ability is not limited to Wiccans. That thought could probably be summarized with the statement that not all pagans are witches, not all witches are Wiccans, but all Wiccans are witches. There are many different traditions of the pagan religion, including rituals with magical workings, and they may be performing witchcraft, but the practitioners of Wicca would seem to be witches and to be practicing witchcraft in the most literal sense of the word. One can further bolster the argument relating the words witch and Wiccan by saying that the practice of Wicca begins with an acceptance of all the ramifications inherent in magical workings aimed at bringing about change. By that I mean that we who practice Wicca assume all responsibilities and consequences of our actions, commensurate with the Wiccan law, also sometimes called the Wiccan ethic. We understand this law or ethic and apply it to our daily lives. We fully appreciate the meaning of the Wiccan Rede and the threefold law, and we try our best to uphold the old code of Wiccan chivalry. These concepts form the basic of the ethics of the old religion, which will be discussed in the next chapter. There are other pagan traditions that practice magic, bring about change. But in some cases, these traditions may not embrace a recognition of the concept of harm and none. That is the root of the Wiccan law. In so doing, they may be working magic and affecting change, but may possibly be doing so in a form that is not acceptable to Wiccans, although they are in reality still practicing witchcraft. By making this statement, please remember that I am in no way implying that those other pagan traditions are in some way inferior to Wicca, or that Wicca is the only way to practice paganism or even witchcraft. All pagan traditions, or any religious tradition for that matter, are valid for their followers. If a spiritual path or path of enlightenment is appropriate to the practitioner, then it most certainly is proper and valid for those who practice it. As always, one of the prime ingredients of adherence in any religious doctrine must be the spiritual and emotional awakening that comes from within the practitioner. This thought is exemplified by one line from the Charge of the Goddess, which states, "For if that which you seek you find not within yourself, you will never find it without." Thus, if the awakening occurs within you, then the path is a viable one, regardless of what others may think or assume about the validity of that path. This is also true for the solitary practitioner of Wicca, because all the teachers, students, training, and coven initiations in the world will not make one iota of a difference if the initiate is not fully and totally in tune with the old religion on a spiritual level. That is the decision the god and goddess will make when they are good and ready to make it, and believe me, they will let you know when the time is right. It is not something novices can arbitrarily decide on their own, and it is not something that is automatically conferred simply due to the public rite of a coven initiation. Truly becoming a witch, be it done as a solitary or in coven, is a deeply moving and profound mental, spiritual, emotional, and sometimes even physical experience. It is an awareness of your connection to the god and goddess, an awareness or maybe even a reawakening of your eons-old link through your ancestors to the wonderful, all-encompassing thing we call nature. The feelings and emotions that will surge through you when you experience that awakening are impossible to describe with the written word. They will alter your heart, raise your soul. They will leave an everlasting mark on all who experience that awakening, with an impact on your very psyche that is almost physical, and your life will be forever changed. Once you truly acknowledge and accept your rightful title of witch, regardless of how it is conferred, you will never again be the same. Wicca makes no claims to be the only way. Indeed, no religion can really make this claim, because all spiritual traditions or paths are meaningful and valid to their practitioners. Unfortunately, there are many religions or spiritual paths that do not share this concept, and honestly believe they have the only meaningful or right avenue of religious pursuit. This type of myopic thinking can usually be found in the more fundamentalist or militant factions of most religions. It usually manifests eventually in such things as inquisitions, holy wars, or other attempts to impose the will of the usually minority fundamentalists on the rest of the inheritors. Fortunately, Wicca does not make this claim. In fact, We refute it and fully support the concept that any religious path is by definition acceptable to the followers of that path. Some Wiccans now recognize the many different aspects of the old religion, even to the point of making that somewhat inflammatory statement that Wicca as we know it today has evolved far beyond the concepts described by Gardner and how it is practiced by Gardnerian and Alexandrian witches. Excuse me. British traditional witch and high priestess Raven Scott breaks from the more traditional school of thought and makes the analysis that common usage has somewhat changed the way we now see and understand Wicca and what it means to be Wiccan. Scott states part of this change has been brought about by the very thing we actually desire to see, our formal recognition as an organized and accepted religion under the laws of the United States. Scott also accepts the fact that not all Wiccans may know the mysteries and cherished beliefs of the British traditionalists. She comments that these newcomers to Wicca are discovering their own mysteries to make either their own traditions in their own way, or they are working the crafts as solitaries, and in so doing they have evolved multiple versions of Wicca. I personally feel as Scott does, that both versions of Wicca have a place in our pagan society because both of them, the traditional and the new, enable us to connect with our ancestors and to find the divinity we seek. In the long run, isn't that what really matters? Many of us have found something that speaks to the deepest and most emotional parts of our very inner selves, something that speaks to us across the gulf of thousands of years. What speaks to us was not called Wicca those thousands of years ago. There were no Gardnerians or Alexandrians at the building of Stonehenge. There was only the craft of the wise, and it was simply there, part of the everyday lives of our ancestors. That is the concept of the old religion that many of us embrace today. We choose to call our practice of the religion Wicca, and we choose to call ourselves witches. I think that most practitioners of today's craft realize that these new approaches have abandoned any deep or hidden content, and instead embrace a totally open and visible path. I think we also understand that learning the ins and outs of the deeper meanings of our religion was never meant to be something that could be done quickly just by reading a few books. We can probably all agree here that a deeper understanding of the craft does indeed require a program of dedication. It is not something that can be learned easily. On the other hand, the newer open or visible paths do lend themselves to a quick course of study. While they must by definition mask the deeper meanings of our religion, they still enable one to get a foothold as either a solitary or a member of a non-traditional coven. Summarizing these thoughts, we can probably make the assumption that the craft of the wise was originally formed around those deeper and hidden concepts. It was never intended to be a religion for an extended population. There was usually only one witch or healer in any given village who truly knew the mysteries, and little thought was probably given to providing interpretations of the belief system beyond that necessary for communal rituals. The result of this transition from the hidden to the open in the 20th century is the fact that many seekers of Wicca have learned the religion essentially through books. Unfortunately, because of this, many of the deeper concepts may have been misunderstood or misinterpreted. Thus, the mysteries have been changed from which was understood by traditionalists to that which is understood by the newcomers. What we have postulated essentially recognizes the emergence of a different form of Wicca, a Wicca that is open, fluid, evolving, and dynamic. This new concept of Wicca sometimes causes serious concerns amongst traditionalist practitioners because it seems to strike at what they see as the very heart of Wicca. And we must realize that their viewpoint, as narrow as it may seem to some newcomers, does indeed have merit. The Wicca I identify with is the practice of the old religion that recognizes the old gods and goddesses, and who have been with us for literally hundreds of thousands of years. Only the names have changed. It is the Wicca that understands the balance in nature that gives us life, death, and rebirth, and it calls for me the deepest parts of my very being. That is my version of Wicca. True, it may not be exactly the same Wicca as practiced by the traditionalists, but it is what calls to me. It is how I understand and worship the old ones, by embracing the divinity we call nature in all our glorious manifestations. So, wow, I like that was a very good, informative chapter. Let's see here. I want to make sure we don't miss anything, because one good thing about this book is it has a lot of tables and it has a lot of exercises to actually do once you do read. So I don't want to miss anything important before the end of the chapter. No, okay. We're gonna continue here. We got about 5 more minutes. All right. So if you are just beginning a study of paganism, you may need to evaluate many different traditions or paths before finding the one which you are looking for. Your chosen path in the old religion must be one that is uniquely suited to you as an individual, and one that lets you speak to the Lord and Lady in your own fashion. That path may lead you to teachers and a coven relationship, or it may lead you down a solitary path. Each has its own validity, and one must not be construed to be somehow superior to the other. To those people who say that a solitary is not a real witch, that a solitary initiation into the craft is not real initiation, and only a 3rd degree witch or an elder can initiate another into the craft, I take great exception. If a solitary individual completes a reasonable course of study in the Wiccan religion, formally and without reservation dedicates and consecrates to the Lord and Lady, swears to defend them and all those who love them, and vows to follow the Wiccan law, then that individual has indeed self-initiated. That initiation has been duly witnessed and accepted by the god and goddess, and he or she has much right to the title of witch as anyone initiated by any coven high priestess or high priestess in any coven ritual. As to the use of the word self-initiate as opposed to self-dedicate, I feel to some degree that this is simply a case of case of semantics. The 1999 World Book Encyclopedia defines the word dedicate as the act or state of giving up wholly or earnestly to some person or purpose. It defines the word initiate as a formal admission into a group or society, or the ceremonies by which one is admitted to a group of society. Whether you use the word dedicate or initiate, you are doing the same thing in either case. You are giving yourself wholly to a purpose, Wicca, and you are being admitted into that society of Wicca by a ceremony. Having stated that solitaries have exactly the same right to use the title of witch as any coven initiate, it is important to realize that solitary practitioners must by necessity obtain their information from existing written sources, either books or possibly from the internet. Please be aware that not every written source available on our craft is necessarily a good source. There are many published materials that contain errors or misinformation. This is usually not by design, but is usually due to conflicting opinions or philosophies between authors, or in some cases is simply due to lack of research by the author. Be aware of this and seek the opinions of others regarding the credibility of an author before totally accepting his or her word. Never assume any author or teacher has the final and absolute answers to all your questions, and always know that there may be some kernel of wisdom in almost any source. If necessary, take what information you feel can use, build on that, and leave the rest behind. Most people knowledgeable of the old religion will also tell you that there is no one and only true path of paganism or Wicca. If you are fortunate enough to come across the teacher or source that espouses this philosophy, run like hell, because this is the last place a novice or a seeker needs to be. There is no such thing as the only way. As long as your path of study is built on a background of solid information, it is quite acceptable, if not necessary, to develop your own religious philosophy by taking the best parts of many others to form a new whole. The path some identify as eclectic Celtic Wicca, which has taken what its practitioners believe to be the best from several paths, Irish, Welsh, and Scot, maybe even some Anglo-Roman influences, is exactly that, and is perfectly acceptable. The main thing that matters in such an eclectic path is the spiritual connection between you and the deities. As long as the connection is established, provides you with growth both spiritually and magically, and is one in which you are comfortable, then go with it. There is nothing wrong with changing your chosen path later on. As your craft knowledge expands over time, you may realize that there is some other path within a tradition, or maybe an entirely different tradition, that seems more comfortable for you. If that happens, it is fully permissible to change direction and go with the new one. Nothing is forever cast in stone. You are free to find the way most suited to you, but it as a solitary or an established tradition, but it must be one of your own choosing, one that ignites your own spirituality. Let me be clear, however, about one important point that every solitary practitioner must take into account. I am in no way implying that a year and a day of self-study, followed by a self-initiation, automatically grants the solitary immediate peerage and equality with those who have completed years of formal study with established teachers and attain the level of third degree in a structured coven. There are people in our religion who have dedicated their lives to learning the craft. They have been taught by others who have similarly dedicated their lives to the study of our craft. And many of them have gone on to accept the position of coven high priest or high priestess. Some have also learned the right to the title of elder. With all the respect due to them, their hard-earned wisdom and education merits. These people are the ones you should seek if at all possible, for they are the teachers who can and will pass on the knowledge that is virtually impossible to attain on your own from any book. I've been a pagan for over 30 years, and I marvel almost daily at the knowledge that I realize I have yet to uncover. The old axiom, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, is very true, believe me. That leads us to a brief discussion of what constitutes a Wiccan priestess or priest. Generally speaking, Wicca does not embody the structure of clergy and congregation typically found in most religions. Any practitioner of the craft who has initiated is considered a priest or a priestess of Wicca. There is no overall governing body granting formal certification. That is not to say that these individuals have amassed sufficient skills or knowledge to become teachers, only that by time of initiation these people have developed ritual skills and the affinity with our deities that essentially define the words priest and priestess. As the high priestess or high priest, typically each tradition will have its own requirements in both the time and skills needed before a priest and priestess can attain this position. It is a position of leadership within the coven, and the individual so designated will be responsible for leading our rituals and magical rites. It is also a position of trust and responsibility, which will be discussed in more detail in Chapter 2 on ethics. Well, there you go. That was a very good introduction. I definitely can't wait to continue reading on this, but I'll save it for our next meeting. That was like I said, that was a really good introduction because a lot of people do want to just dive into the craft because the main reason they're interested in it is they want to know how to do spells. And I think it's interesting that during that whole segment, the word spell I don't think was said one time. I think that's really important because you should know exactly the history of what you're doing before you even delve into something as special and as meaningful and powerful as spell work. So I can't wait to read with you guys again on the next segment. I'll try to make one of these a night, so that way we can we can come here every day and relax after a long day of work and just chill out. So there you go. That's the first segment of Reading at the Witching Hour with your host Aries StarWind. That's it for tonight. God is blessed. Blessed be. Have a good one. See you next time, everyone.